Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bassam Haddad, and I'm joined by Mouin Rabbani, my co-host, and this is Media Wars Episode 2, Media slash Wars or Media Wars, however you would like to see it. This is a new series that examines the truths and absurdities of our era, centering on the US-Israel war on Iran and beyond. Fast paced and eclectic, it blends media roundups with commentary and analysis to expose the folly and brutality of empire and imperial media. The program moves between granular detail and broad historical and geopolitical context, treating weighty, world altering subjects in often a casual, sometimes irreverent voice. This show is not suitable for children because of some of the language that may be used either by ourselves or in the media. We have with us our comrade, Professor Alireza Doostdar, and we will introduce him in just a moment. And of course, Mouin will follow up after I just make a couple of comments on the current state of things. We are recording on Wednesday, April 8th, when the quote unquote ceasefire has already been broken by Israel on the count that there is a legitimate misunderstanding per J.D. Vance's words, even though the 10 points addressed by Iran included ending any kind of hostilities, including on the Lebanon front. We also have a massive murderous bombing of Beirut. Within a few minutes, more than 100 missiles were fired into Beirut, into areas away from Al-Dahiya, which is the supposed quote-unquote Hezbollah stronghold, which we will talk about later. And then, of course, there was another set of missiles also lobbed at Tel Khayat in Lebanon and so on. The dead and injured now number more than 1,000, and we have a very important turning point that speaks to the weight of Iran in geopolitics in general. We will not address these things too much in this particular series because this is about media portrayal, but this is an important turning point. We also have another issue, which is the perception of the United States as a mighty military power that has actually been put to the test. And we also have a number of developments that we will be addressing with a number of our guests today, including Safa Al-Ahmad, who will be talking about media in the Gulf and on the Arab Gulf. We also have with us Jasper Nathaniel, who will be discussing the West Bank, Maya Mikdashi, who will be discussing Lebanon, Adel Iskandar, who will be discussing Al-Jazeera and talk a little bit about its history. And Professor Abdullah, what's the last name? Mouin, it keeps escaping me. We're speaking with him shortly.
Baabood.
Baabood, yeah, which is, I guess, in Lebanon we have Abdullah Aboud, so it keeps escaping me. Who will be addressing also the setting in the Gulf, and Mouin will say a bit more about this if possible. So I'll stop here. I wanted to say a little bit more about some of the dynamics between Iran and the United States, but I'll give it to you, Mouin, before we turn to Alireza.
Well, I'll speak slowly because I'm still recovering from a severe case of whiplash. Yesterday morning, Trump was boasting that he would end Iranian civilization and it would never return. Then in the evening, he announced a ceasefire. The Pakistani prime minister put out a statement that explicitly stated it applied to all fronts, and he specifically mentioned Lebanon. This morning, Israel, as you mentioned, Bassam, launched its massive murderous bombing raid on the Lebanese capital. Then the Americans said Iran's 10-point proposal, which Trump's social media post indicated would serve as the basis for negotiations. His spokeswoman, Catherine Levitt, said it had been tossed into the garbage. The U.S. Deputy Leader J.D. Vance said the murderous bombing of Beirut was a result of what did he call it? A legitimate misunderstanding, because apparently the Pakistani prime minister had been insufficiently clear when he explicitly stated that Lebanon was included in the ceasefire terms. And Iran has now apparently imposed new restrictions on the passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, telling the Americans you have to choose between the Straits and Israel's wars. So a lot still to happen in the coming days until we get a better sense of where things stand. And as you mentioned, one of our guests, Dr. Abdullah Baabood, speaking to us from the Omani capital, Muscat, will also speak about the perspective of the Gulf states, the GCC states, about this war that they feel has been launched at their expense on Israel's behalf and caused enormous damage throughout that region.
Thanks, Mouin. Let's move to Alireza. Just a couple of words about Alireza. Alireza is director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Chicago and has been a longtime colleague and friend who has contributed to quite a bit of what we have been doing and writing and publishing at Jadaliya and beyond. Alireza, I don't know where to start. I hope you, your family, friends, loved ones are okay, and we would like you to share with us some of your views on what's going on and also how everything is being framed. And we will leave you with the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bassam. Thank you, Maureen. It's a pleasure to be with you both, and I hope your families likewise are doing okay. What I thought I would talk about a little bit is some of the different ways that this war has been represented and mediated through mass media, and the vast chasm that I see between mainstream media, predictably, and social media. With the mainstream media in the U.S. and Europe, primarily in the United States, I think we're predictably seeing, for the most part, these media acting as stenographers of empire, doing very little from the beginning to question Israeli and U.S. regime narratives of the war, their rationale, their strategies and tactics, and more than anything, the war crimes and atrocities that the Israelis and the U.S. have been committing. And this is no surprise. I mean, this is something they've been doing for decades. One part of this that has been, I think, a little bit more specific to this particular war on Iran is the extraordinary amount of airtime that these media have been granting to supporters of the war, especially when it comes to Iranian voices in the diaspora, such that it has given off, I think, especially in the earlier period of the war, the incorrect view, the incorrect assumption that the Iranian diaspora is for this war, whereas the views are much more complicated, and there have been surveys that show that that's by no means the case. And you know, this is, I think, this is most egregious when you see figures being brought on air who have no expertise or authority to really be representing Iranians or speaking on the topic, including actors and comedians who went on air and excused American and Israeli war crimes from the very first moment, most egregiously in the case of the attack on the Minab school that killed 160 schoolgirls. Now, this hasn't been uniformly the case. I mean, I think they have also given airtime to experts who have offered very valuable information and correctives. So I'm thinking Vali Nasr, Nagis Bajogli, Trita Parsi, Negar Mortazavi, and others who've really been breaths of fresh air, I think, in the media world. Now, the social media landscape, I think, is a lot more complicated, and I just want to highlight a few things about what's been playing out this time around. And not some of this is new, some of it is not so new. So one thing that hasn't been new is just the way in which political leaders have been using social media posts, both to stake out positions, to announce positions, and to communicate and to message, especially in this round, around controlling the market, the oil market in particular. So Trump, of course, the most famous, the most prominent of these, and he's a world unto himself with his tweets, and we could spend hours talking about them, and I don't think we should, but at least not today. But I think something significant this time around has been Iranian government officials on X, especially communicating their official positions, and them also contributing to the market manipulation. So I'm thinking of Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the head of the parliament, who has been countering some of the messaging from Trump, attempting to massage and control the oil market. And I think that's been pretty significant, especially in a context where from the beginning, the aim has been to quote unquote decapitate Iranian leadership and to undermine the possibility that there will be a coherent leadership, and I think also coherent decision making and messaging around the war, and that they haven't managed to do that. Now, the other side of this from the Iranian state side is a media war that they've been waging. And I think most significantly, this is becoming more and more, drawing more and more attention, is the meme war that has been waged from the Iranian side. Part of it very explicitly official, like the Iranian embassy accounts, some of them seemingly coordinated, engaging in a very savvy meme war that has been attracting a lot of attention. And even more famous than that, this group called Explosive Media that's been putting out really remarkable AI generated Lego videos. When Trump announced the ceasefire, they immediately had one out that was sort of showing him eating a taco at the end of a fairly long, I think like a 2 or 3 minute video that takes a while to make. Now, who's making the Explosive Media videos? That's a little bit more complicated. Are they explicitly, if they're clearly on the side of the Iranian state, but are they employees of the state, or are they their own independent organ? They say they're independent. It's been a really interesting dimension of this of the media side of this war. Just a couple other things to highlight. I think the open source intelligence reports on the war have been really helpful in both balancing mainstream media reporting and countering or offering reality checks to some of the official narratives by all the actors. So in the lead up to the war, we had, there was this official picture that the U.S. was actually engaged in good faith negotiations, and the open source intelligence reports were showing that there was a massive buildup. And of course, the U.S. was using that in part also as its messaging, but it was very clear that the buildup was not for nothing, and it wasn't just for a threat. So it, I think, helped at least for people who were paying attention to those accounts to recognize that where this was going. And I think something similar that has proved important, I think, especially will prove important when the war winds down too, is the participation of some of the Persian Gulf monarchies in allowing U.S. bases on their territory to be used for staging and launching attacks. And it's been open source intelligence accounts that have been showing the locations of some of the launches and some of the force buildups, and from everything from missile launchers to fighter aircraft to tankers and support and so on. And then finally, just to give an appreciation, I think there have been expert voices on social media and especially on X who've been offering very valuable and consistent analysis of the war. On the Iranian side, I'm thinking, for instance, of Hamid Reza Azizi, who's been doing daily reporting of the Iranian strategic narrative, which you can't really find anywhere else. And I think all thought sort of together, it's I think it shows something really interesting about the moment, in the sense that there have been very legitimate worries about the decline of social media and especially X after Musk's takeover, but it remains a really indispensable resource and a significant counterweight to mainstream outlets, especially in a crisis situation like the war and like this war. I'll leave it there, and happy to chat.
Thanks, Alireza. I'll let Mouin also interject, but can you just tell us a little bit about what's going on from what you have been observing inside Iran regarding the back and forth? We are aware that internet that is outside Iran is blocked, but people have access to local/national internet. Can you tell us a little bit about what is going on within or inside Iran, and how people in Iran are learning the news, and whether people can actually access things like this, like YouTube or what have you? If you can just tell us a little bit about this in the context of this back and forth regarding the agreement, the ceasefire, and the kind of I don't know what to call this. This is new. The way Trump releases statements and then goes back on them and then releases another statement, and then of course in the end you don't know what is legitimate. Hence, giving J.D. Vance the opportunity to say this is a legitimate misunderstanding. So if you can clarify a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in terms of people's access, as you said, internet access to the outside world is almost completely cut off. I say almost because There are some people who are allowed access, and that includes journalists, for instance. Maybe not, I don't think every journalist, but some journalists do have access that is approved. And then there are people who have means of accessing the internet that do not depend on state-approved channels. So people with Starlink satellite, for instance. And there are people who are purchasing VPNs, and those have become very expensive and hard to access, but still some of them are there. But for the most part, people are not able to come online. And so they're, in terms of their news sources, either they have to have people who do have access around them, or they rely on state media, or it's satellite channels. So there's, unfortunately, for the most part, nefarious. So the Iran International is one of the most popular news channels, and Saudi funded, some people say Israeli funded or supported, and has been an extremely powerful actor in really manufacturing consent for this war for quite some time. So those are available, and the state's been trying to counter them and so on, but still it remains something that people can access. Uh, People are able to make phone calls. So if you, not super easy, it's more difficult than before, but if you purchase a phone card, fairly cheap, fairly inexpensive, you're able to contact loved ones outside. And this is the way that I've been in touch with people. So that's in terms of people's access. What was your other question again? About the
Actually,
ceasefire.
yeah, and as I reiterated, Mouin, do you want to add something so that he can combine his response?
Well, I wanted to ask, Iran is not known, of course, for having a free press, but it does seem to have a wider spectrum of opinion than many of the surrounding states. And my question was how Iranian media is responding to the developments of the last 24 hours. I've read that there has been quite a bit of contention about that, and I wonder if that's true.
That is true. I mean, I think for the primary narrative has been one of support for the ceasefire. There are some, how to say, more kind of strident, hardline, or these are American sort of framings, but hardline or more radical positions that have been disappointed with the ceasefire. And then there's an in between, which is cautiously optimistic or cautiously supportive, and rightly, I think, pointing out that previous instances of ceasefire have been cover for U.S. and Israeli attempts to really recuperate their forces and then relaunch attacks, and negotiations have been used as cover for attacks. So I think the fact that this is a 2-week, as initially formulated, a 2-week ceasefire has been a little bit easier to swallow in that sense. Right? It's not a permanent ceasefire without an actual peace deal. And the fact that Iran retains its Hormuz lever, right, which, as Bassam pointed out, it's already exercising today after the flauntings of the violations of the ceasefire. So the fact that Iran actually negotiated from strength, from a stronger position actually compared to the June war, I think that has allayed some anxieties. But there are people who are, I think, critical of the possibility. Especially, I think this partly has to do also with shifts in Iranian official decision making too, because just a couple days ago they were saying that we reject any temporary ceasefire and we will only agree to, like a permanent deal. But then there was this turnaround and they actually accepted a ceasefire. And exactly how that happened, I mean, people have some, like analysts have some guesses, but it was never really spelled out by the officials themselves.
All right, I would like to actually address so much about the politics, but we wanted to focus more on the media, so we will leave you with whatever you would like people to just keep in mind about the current moment. I've followed you and your writing, as you know, Alireza, for some time, and unfortunately, we keep connecting when there's trouble and when there's crises and when there's killing and mayhem. But I've followed your work and I follow you on X, and I've noticed a lot of interesting remarks that you have made. Can you give us like a closing remark as to what people should pay attention to, not from an outside in perspective, because you and I and others are here and we're looking outside in, but from a perspective that is more local, more reflective of what people in Iran are thinking, whether or not they support the regime. And we know that we need to get beyond that at a time when the country is being bombed in some areas to smithereens. And of course, more to come, according to the president of the free world. So that's what I would love for you to close with, something that is based on your knowledge of the Iranian terrain. I shouldn't say
Yeah,
terrain.
well,
That's battle oriented. The you know
land.
the Iranian setting. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, maybe what I'll say is precisely to that point is something that I have to repeatedly remind myself of, especially when I visit Iran after having been in the US for a year or 2 years and so on, is the amount to which, even for those of us who are familiar with the way that the media work, that there's a kind of a percolation or sedimentation of particular narratives and representations that shape even against, I think, our best intentions or our consciousness. So this happens to me, and when I go to Iran, it just strikes me how much how different things are compared to what the way that you experience it from outside. There have been, I think, if you're paying attention, there have been a couple things that are really significant this time around, especially around popular support for the state's defensive effort, right? Defensive effort in the war. And there are two components of that I'll highlight, which one of them has gotten more attention than the other. The one that has gotten less attention is from day one, people have been coming out, supporters have been coming out into the squares and doing gatherings, sit-ins, protests, sort of songs, getting together to rally support, but also to act as kind of support for one another, and also as part of the state's strategy of rallying people around this kind of defensive war. And there have been other dimensions to this, and it's not just been the so-called kind of regime supporters, quote unquote, right? I mean, there are people who I know of who've gone back to Iran from Europe, for instance, primarily from the left, who've been going to these things, and it's it's a kind of a surprisingly eclectic group of people. It is primarily, I think, the base, but that's not exclusively the case. And then the point that's been getting a little bit more attention just yesterday was the massive numbers of people who went and formed chains around some of the power infrastructure. And other infrastructure, so not just power stations, but also power plants, but also bridges, and other locations. And really, I mean, if you looked at some of the Western media, they were talking about how this was. There were people, including Trump himself, who was saying that this is not allowed. These are war crimes. This is false. It's not a war crime to be putting your body on the line for civilian infrastructure. It's a war crime to be targeting them. But I think it was a really remarkable outpouring of support and kind of mobilization by ordinary people around these things. And it should shift, I think, the way that people think about the complex landscape of support, criticism, and opposition to the Iranian state, and the way that war kind of recalibrates that or transforms that, and especially the role that in this case, the U.S. and Israeli empire have been the way that that's been impacting these shifting popular grounds, right, in the country itself.
Thank you, Alireza. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and we'd love to have you again. Actually, we don't love to have you again, hoping that we won't have to talk, but I think we will have to talk. It doesn't look like this is going to end anytime soon, not least because it's not just an American thing, it's also an
No.
Israeli thing, and that makes it more complex and probably a longer episode. We will see you soon, and thanks for coming in on such short notice.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Hala, hala, take care.
Yalla.
Salam.
Take care. Salamat.
All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us, Safa Al-Ahmad and Jasper Nathaniel. We will be doing very quick introductions given what is going on in the world today and so much to get covered. I'll start with Safa Al-Ahmad, who is an award-winning freelance journalist and filmmaker with a focus on Yemen and the Arab Gulf. Safa, first of all, so good to have you. It's great to see you and to see you in safe and sound. We would like to hear from you a bit about the moment and how it's being captured in various media. And you can select what to focus on, what to address in terms of which media and on what topic. But we'd love to hear your take. We've talked with you before on various topics regarding the Arab Gulf throughout the wars that don't seem to stop. And the floor is yours.
I forgot to ask you before we record if I can curse or not.
You mean
because I think
you can say shit, fuck, and everything in between. And
I
this
mean,
is
honestly,
and this is in the recording. We're
shit?
not taking this out. I don't take anything out.
No, I mean, it's a shit show, and I woke up this morning hopeful that actually today was going to be a little better, and the Israelis managed to fuck it up even worse than it was yesterday. So that's how I feel generally about the situation. But when it comes to the media coverage of this, I've been obviously, as all journalists do now, depending on what languages you speak, you're watching everything and listening to everything and reading everything. And but I must say, I've been really surprised with the Arabic coverage. And so, as people know, I don't know who our audiences are going to be, but within the Arabic media landscape, the Gulf actually controls most of the pan-Arab news outlets. And so you have Al-Jazeera, which is Qatar funded and owned, and then you have Al-Arabiya, which is the other big news organization in the Arab world, which is owned by Saudi and now is run out of Riyadh. And so for both of them, obviously, because they're under attack now by Iran, you would think that the rhetoric would sound different than it is now. But they have been very, very cautious, I would say, in how they are covering the war and how they're speaking about Iran. Obviously, the Al-Arabiya coverage is a lot more critical of Iran and what's happening in the war, and is obviously more pro-Trump administration and critical of Hezbollah, obviously, but that's been a trend for a very long time. But I feel like all of the Arabic media coverage in the Gulf of the war has been extremely cautious. Like, everybody knows that the day after, they're going to be left trying to deal with Iran after the Israelis and the Americans have stopped, right? And so with that comes a really interesting dynamic of how they're trying to deal with the rhetoric of the Iranians, of how they're covering the casualties in Iran. But I think the most disturbing thing, I must say, from the Saudi, at least, focused and UAE focused media, how they're covering Lebanon. And that, to me, is the bigger and more difficult thing to kind of not understand. You understand because of their criticism of Hezbollah and everything, but their ability to kind of minimize the suffering of the Lebanese people and the amount of internally displaced people and all the knock-on effects on the country. I would say Jazeera Arabic has done a much better job in covering what's happening in Lebanon. And that even goes from a production value of, as you know, Jazeera and most of the Arabic channels have stopped making packages, right? And so there are no more news packages, like the rest of news media in general. But when it comes to Lebanon, Al-Jazeera Arabic has been doing packages. Their journalists are on the ground. Unlike a lot of the other correspondents that they have around the Arab world, they're just talking from the studio. It's only talking heads. And so that, I think that, at least for the Jazeera coverage, I would say gives you a more vivid understanding of what's going on the ground. Everything else feels claustrophobic. Everybody has a correspondent in Tehran, for example, and they talk them on every top of the hour, but extremely claustrophobic. The last package I remember of any of these journalists going outside their studio is, I think, for a government-sponsored thing when they were trying to take everybody to the supermarkets and proving... Sorry, your dog is in the back. To prove that there's food in the
So, sorry,
supermarkets,
sorry
right?
to cut you off
Yeah.
1 second. Can you explain to our viewers what you're referring to when you say package? Because they may not know exactly what you refer to. And in all honesty, even though this is a show on media, but Mouin and I are not actual media folks, so I also don't know what it means, although I can guess.
A news package.
Yes.
So a news package is like a 1.5 to 2 minute edit of whatever the journalist is covering, right? And so
So
what is
footage
happening
shot
now?
outside the studio.
Correct, right? And so stories, vox pops, interviews edited together to do a 1.5 to 2 minute story in the news, which used to be the norm in news. I know that dates me, but now most of organizations don't do that anymore. But when it comes to this war specifically, the aesthetics are only talking heads all the time, right? With very claustrophobic studio voices. And so you don't get to see what's happening outside. The footage of the destruction is just basically something that they took from social media. So it's not that the journalists went out to record it themselves. And so even the quality of the journalism itself is, in my opinion, degraded. And so the other thing I would say is that the amount of original journalism in Arabic has degraded like in an astonishing level. They quote Axiom for some reason. Everybody in the Arab world is obsessed with the Axios and what they're saying, and Israeli media, right? And so very little original journalism is being done in these Arabic channels. And they're relying heavily on American and Israeli narratives to tell us what's happening in the region. And I find that really disturbing. Like before, at least there was a journalist that's going out on the street and asking people questions, and we're getting original journalism, regardless of what you think of the angle or the perspective of those journalists. At least they're out in the field. But since Gaza, the only people who are out in the field are in Lebanon. And that to me, it really degrades the quality of the reporting itself, but also our understanding. So we're not getting original pictures. We're not getting anything that is not, I want to say, the white gaze. So we're getting everything from there and bringing it to an Arabic audience. And even like with Al Arabiya and Jazeera, but especially Al Jazeera, every news hour, they have an American journalist and in translation. So they couldn't even find an Arab American or somebody who speaks Arabic that can speak to American politics in Arabic. And that to me, again, they're reinforcing the white gaze. And why do I have to hear somebody in translation? It's a very disorienting experience, honestly. And the Jazeera has been doing this specifically with this Iran war. Like with Gaza and stuff, they didn't do this, and they were running 24/7 on Gaza. But with this war, they're bringing people who were close or advisor of the Republican Party or Trump, or like specifically of that kind of narrative. And they're bringing these translations in. And that also degrades our understanding of it, because they're bringing things that I would say is very government propaganda narratives rather than analysts or people who have a degree of separation from the American government. And I would say this is not by accident of what kind of narratives they want to bring to an Arab audience.
So you're basically saying that Arab media are both going out of their way not to offend Iran, but at the same time also trying to give us the American perspective on things. So
Not
it
trying.
seems,
They are
or they
spoon
are.
feeding us the
So it
American
seems like,
Israeli narrative.
yeah. So
You know,
it
like
seems like they're treading a fine line, which is also very much a reflection of government policy. No.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, this is the sad state of Arab media in general, right?
Mm.
Where they have no, they are. I'm going to be generous and say afraid to have their own POV on what's going on, right? And so they're they're giving these narratives as if they're in this neutral territory when we're not, especially with this war. And they're even lacking, like I was watching Al Arabiya all day for you, Bassam, and it was, they didn't even say this is a war of choice. They didn't say this is against international law. They didn't give any of the context. Regardless of what you think of Iran or the Iranian government, you can give international law. You can give these perspectives, but they're not even saying that. They're not even doing those things. So they're doing a disservice to the Arab audience. And so it's kind of like I feel like I'm having to gaslight myself as I watch Arab media, because it's a lot of denial of what they are. And I'm going to go back to specifically because it's Gulf media. There is no reflection on how did we get to a place where we spent billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars across the years, and now we're having to bring in even more mercenaries, armies, specialists from Greece and Spain and Australia and I don't know what, to protect us in the Gulf. Why is that even happening? Like, there are no existential questioning in Arabic media right now of how we got to this place, right? There's this fine treading, but it's also, you can watch all day and actually not be informed about what's happening. And that is more disturbing. So it's not even about, I think, Mouin, you're being very generous as well by saying they're treading this fine line between Iran and the United States. But I think it's more insidious. You're actually not informing your audiences, right? And it seems to me that Lebanon is one of the last places where you're actually getting good journalism out of it, right? Where somebody is out there trying to tell you this is what's happening on the ground.
And
obviously,
regarding
I'm excluding Palestine from this. Palestine is a whole different question. Yeah.
and just regarding this official perspectives journalism, if you will, it sounds like we're getting very little news on what public opinion in these states actually thinks, what their views are.
What
It's
public
not.
opinion?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I want to piggyback on this. I wanted to ask that question, or related question, and that is the idea that Iran is striking these Arab states that have American bases has actually created a very interesting situation. For Qatar, it's actually maybe a little different at some level because of Al Jazeera and what Al Jazeera reports as opposed to Al Arabiya or UAE the stations. So can you tell us a little bit about the question of public opinion, whether or not it is being gathered, and the official discourse? The official discourse must condemn and denounce and all of that, but you could tell, even from the officials who appear on television, not every single one, but you could tell here and there that they need to say this because they have to act like they were shocked or that was a really, aggressive thing, whereas they knew very well that this is the natural consequence that was actually announced by Iran and so on and so forth. So there's that issue, and then there's the issue of what I do because that's how you find out certain things. Looking at the comments, not just of Jazeera, who has a better sort of reporting than say Al Arabiya historically and even now, regardless of shortcomings in terms of some of the framings and so on. You could look at the comments, and even in Al Arabiya comments on YouTube or elsewhere, you see that there is a serious gap between these official statements and what people are saying. Not that people are happy that their country is being bombed, but there is a different, much more aware level of understanding, and sometimes there's support, as in, this we did this, and we're getting what we potentially deserve, and then of course people condemn the killing of their own citizens by Iranian drones and missiles and so on. Can you tell us about these two things, Mouin? I'm hoping that this is also this couches your question as well.
It does
I mean,
now.
I would, I would. Public opinion in the Gulf is a tricky thing because for people who don't know the Gulf, We don't have free media, right? We don't have any independent media at all. And there is a high price to pay if you say anything that goes against what the official government policies are, right? And so when you say public opinion, if a journalist is going to ask somebody in Saudi Arabia or in Bahrain what the real opinion is, there's a high risk and real probability of blowback on them from the government if they say something that is different, right? And so I can tell you genuinely the people around me and who I communicate with, right? But everybody is a bubble. And so I can't tell you what the general Gulf public opinion is. That's impossible for anybody who tries to say that is a liar. Because there are no polls in the Arab world. And if there is a poll, I mean, everybody jokes, oh, the polls is the Ministry of Interior answering questions, right? Like there's no real way of gauging any of this. Like even there was a poll after the genocide in Gaza, and the poll was claiming that the majority of Saudis have changed their minds about a possible peace treaty with Israel. Or I was like, who would dare say that? Like, who would dare answer in any way that is not what the official government line was at the time, right? And so I cannot say any of that. I can't tell you what is what would be the opinion of the general public in the Gulf. But what I can say is there are a lot of people that must be wondering, where did all the money go? How is it that we still rely on foreign governments and especially the United States, for our own protection, right? And nobody is surprised about what Iran is doing. I think what is the genuine surprise is that they had the audacity to do it, right? That the Iranians did say that they're going to do this, but nobody really thought that they would do it, right? Because this is a departure for Iran. Just like, I mean, we've been, how long has it been with the Saudi-led coalition war on Yemen, right? Nobody thought that the Saudis, before that moment, the Saudis never did a direct war on a neighboring country. And so we are now dealing with a lot of historically unprecedented events, right? And it's a perfect storm of all of these things together that are now making people question what have always been the policies of course, America is going to save us in the Gulf, but America did not come save the Gulf.
Quite
right?
the contrary.
Quite the opposite. Exactly. And the question is, okay, so they did come to the aid of Israel. They did come to save Israel. They prioritize Israel's security and safety and foreign policy over the Gulf that has spent all these millions to protect themselves, thinking that the United States is going to do that, right? And so I think it would be stupid if people are not reviewing the policies that have been the norm in the Gulf. Yes, exactly. And so I can't tell you what the public opinion is about it, but I would say logically, everybody is questioning what has been the norm until now, right? And with that, because of what's been happening in Gaza, because of the genocide there, because of what's happening in Lebanon, everybody is thinking nobody is safe from Israel right now, right? Regardless of whether the United States, the Trump administration, or whatever administration comes after them, right? Israel is Israel, and they have proven that they are willing to attack countries governments that they don't agree with, right? And so Iran is a lesson for the Gulf as well. So it's not just, the Iranians are an aberration, and if the Iranian regime falls, then everything's hunky-dory in the Middle East, right? Like nobody is that naive to think this. If Israel is allowed to do this, and there are no repercussions to it, then what's to stop them from taking over or occupying Jordan or more bits of Syria and Egypt and Saudi Arabia for the greater Israel, right? Like if we're going to go all the way to the logical conclusion of what's been happening in the past 3 years in Gaza and in the West Bank, then everybody should be asking themselves these questions, and they'd be stupid if they didn't.
Safa, Thank you so much. There's a lot that we would like to discuss, but we would like to bring in Jasper. Are you able to stay with us, or do you have to leave?
I can
Me?
say, yeah.
No.
No, I'm Safa. Okay.
So,
Great. Thank you.
oh, yeah, Jasper, it's so great to have you with us. Just for our viewers, Jasper Nathaniel is a Brooklyn-based writer and reporter who covers the occupation through regular on-the-ground reporting in the West Bank. And his Substack, Infinite Jazz, which I believe has just obtained an orange check mark, is very highly recommended. Jasper, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'd like to begin with a question focusing specifically on the West Bank. As you yourself have been reporting, there's been an explosion of violence against Palestinians, and particularly rural Palestinian communities in the West Bank, to the extent that even many prominent Israelis have tried to put some distance between themselves and this and these serial attacks. And you've reported on this. Could you give us a sense of what's happening, why, and perhaps crucially, what media narrative is being used to present these changes?
Yes, absolutely. So this latest explosion in violence in the West Bank is frankly one of many explosions in violence as part of a much larger explosion of violence that started years ago. It started before October 7th, actually. So it's never been a good situation for Palestinians living under the occupation since 1967. But there was this real material change that occurred when the new government in Israel came into power at the end of 2022 and early 2023. And, I think a lot of people know this is the most right-wing government in Israel's history. We suddenly have these ideological messianic settlers like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich taking these positions of great power. But the real fundamental change was that Smotrich, the finance minister, who had been charged with terrorism-related offenses in the past for plotting to blow up a highway in response to the Gaza disengagement in 2005, he basically inserted himself inside the machinery of the military occupation of the West Bank, and he sort of systematically cleared out all the guardrails that had been slowing settlement expansion. And so there has been this just rapid acceleration in settlement expansion in the last couple of years before October 7th. And then October 7th comes around, and now, they have this sort of nominal security justification for everything they're doing. So the settlers have long sort of, positioned themselves to Israel and to the world as, the bulletproof vest, protecting 48 Israel from, the barbarians east of the Green Line. And, now they love to say, there would never be an October 7th out of the West Bank because you have settlements here. If you had kept the settlements in Gaza, you wouldn't have had a, Hamas attack. And so this is a line that, frankly, is very effective in convincing even, ostensibly liberal Israelis who don't care for the settlement movement, for convincing them to basically, let them keep growing there. So the reason I give all this background is because there's been a lot made of the fact that settler violence is virtually never prosecuted, right? And when you do see people coming out and condemning settlers, and people like to say, the military stands by and watches it, and then they don't prosecute them. That is actually not only is it understating it, but it's sort of categorically mischaracterizing it, because the violence is a part of the government policy of expanding settlements. There is simply no way for Israel to meet the goals that Smotrich has set for settlement growth without violently expelling Palestinians. And so all of these, attacks that you're seeing, when you see a viral video of settlers going into a community and bludgeoning farmers and, pregnant women and whomever. These are not random attacks. These are settlers who have, very strategically, working with the military and with the government, potentially have plotted where they are going to build what they call an outpost, which is basically like the beginnings of a settlement that has not yet been authorized by Israel. And, working with the military to make sure they have, they're armed and they have their own, armed guard from the military. And then from these outposts, they launch these attacks on communities, which are then, if they're successful, they drive Palestinians off their land. And then later, Israel retroactively authorizes the settlement, the outpost, and it becomes a settlement, or it becomes a neighborhood of an existing settlement. And so, like a perfect example of this sort of hypocrisy was, a couple weeks, maybe 2 weeks ago, there was this viral video from CNN reporter Jeremy Diamond, who I think deserves a lot of credit because, he went into this village called Taysir where an elderly Palestinian man had been beaten in his sleep and had his skull fractured. And he documents this sort of remarkable exchange that they have where these Israeli soldiers come and assault the CNN camera crew and detain them. And one of the soldiers just says to Jeremy Diamond, the CNN correspondent, we are here to get revenge for a settler who was killed in an automobile accident, which they are claiming was a terror attack. They say that, all of what they call Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank, all of it belongs to the Jews. And when Jeremy Diamond says to them, this is not authorized by Israel, where you are right now is Palestinian land, they say we're going to work to get it authorized into a real settlement. So they just come out and admit all this stuff. So
to
now
the wrong person.
What's that?
To the wrong person.
Exactly, to the wrong person. But what the part of the story that did not make it out as much, even though again, credit to Jeremy Diamond, he did tweet about this, was that so like the video goes viral. It causes a bit of a PR crisis. Israel announces that they have suspended that particular battalion, pulled them out of the West Bank and sent them into training or whatever. The very next day, there was a brutal, ferocious settler pogrom in the exact same village. And so the point being, like in Taysir, if the interest of the Israeli government and the military was to prevent these vicious assaults and to prevent, their military from backing these vicious assaults, you would think that they wouldn't just pull this military battalion out, but they would do something to actually prevent the settlers from coming back day after day to attack. But they did nothing. And so, these condemnations that you hear coming from Netanyahu, coming from the head of the Central Command in the West Bank, coming from the president of Israel, and coming from AIPAC congressmen like Dan Goldman and Richie Torres. I mean, these condemnations, what they're doing is they are sort of obfuscating the fact that this is a government project, right? Mm-hmm. This is one of the most central projects of the Israeli state is this project of settlement expansion, which requires this level of violence. When you, as an Israeli politician, come out and condemn a particular attack, you are making it seem like this is a fringe event and you can just sort of like cordon off the bad guys. But the reality is, like, this is a state project. And so to go back to the sort of central question of like, how has the media represented this? I mean, I think what they have failed to do in large part is to show how none of this is random. These are not fringe attacks. And again, like,
about the Western media now.
I'm talking about the Western media. Frankly, like Haaretz does much better reporting on this than any mainstream Western outlet, because they document in close detail how like the highest levels of the Israeli government and of the IDF and the Central Command are collaborating directly with settler leaders. The Western press is just not showing that. And again, like they will occasionally talk about how there's no enforcement against settlers, but again, there's a big difference between not enforcing laws against settlers versus actively helping the settlers break the law.
And that brings me to my next question, because you're basically portraying a reality in which the settlers are functioning as auxiliaries of the state. At the same time, I think it's probably accurate to say that the Israeli press has, in previous times, also tried to present the settlers as a kind of autonomous, independent actor, operating beyond state control. But now that you have the extreme right controlling such senior positions in the Israeli government, and the Israeli society and media themselves have shifted so far to the right, um, is the Israeli press also still seeking to preserve this distance between the settlers and the state, or is it now more openly embracing them as doing the work of Israel's project in the West Bank?
Yeah, I think that it's sort of like polarized the press. So I mean, if you read like Mariv or Israel Hayom or one of the more sort of right leaning ones, they are much more sympathetic in their portrayal of the settlers. I will say, when there is an attack that is just objectively brutal and completely indefensible, then even some of the right wing newspapers will try to create distance between like those
Bad
particular
apples.
settlers. Yeah, right, exactly, because they want to insulate the broader settler movement. You
But
have
they still feel a need to do that in such circumstances.
absolutely, yeah,
Huh.
yeah. No, I think that like I was saying before, the broader sort of position of the Israelis, not just the media, after October 7th,
Mm,
has been nothing comes before our security.
mm,
And to the extent that, I mean, this, that after the second Intifada, the sort of nominal left wing in Israel sort of lost all of its juice, because
mm.
they thought that, well, I guess we do have to just keep our boot on their necks in order to prevent the suicide bombings and stuff. And so the same sort of thing happened after October 7th. And there are, like, Haaretz is an interesting one, because I mean I think it's fair to say that this is a very much a liberal Zionist outlet still, but it is just a fact that as far as English language reporting goes, nobody is doing more to show the close coordination happening between government and the military and the settler movement. So it's kind of all over the map. But in general, besides the sort of left wing press, which again I think is still sort of protective of the greater Zionist project, but I think for the most part there is an inclination to distance the bad settlers from the good settlers, and to maintain some sort of credibility still for the settlement initiative.
Mhm. And are you seeing any shifts in Western media coverage of this, of perhaps less use of what's it called, the passive exonerative, um,
Yeah.
and trying to lay bare the organic relationships between the
Mhm.
settlers and the state? Or is it still kind of these rogue vandals? The Israeli
Mhm.
government really should get a grip on them.
Yeah. I mean, just going by like the New York Times, who I think is like a proxy for all of mainstream media in America. I mean, the New York Times, I mean, the first problem is that, the West Bank is treated as a sort of peripheral, secondary or tertiary issue that's sort of unrelated to, Gaza or Iran or all these other things. Whereas, the West Bank is actually, like I said, I think much more sort of central to the Zionist project than what they're doing in most of these other countries, where
Yeah.
Israel's right wing ministers are not like using the same sort of language to talk about bombing Iran that they are when they talk about like annexing the West Bank, which for them is based on like a biblical mandate. They are using that language for Lebanon and parts of Syria and stuff, I should say. But so the first problem is, I think the media just sort of fails to like articulate the centrality of the West Bank project. And also when you consider that like the two-state solution continues to be the sort of main, talking point of politicians who would like to, pretend that they're interested in dignity for Palestinians. Like if the two-state solution is what they care about, then they should be pretty focused on the West Bank, because that is where you would think, but they can't.
You're too focused on the two-state solution to focus on the West Bank.
Well, I think that's by design, though, because if you just keep repeating two-state solution like a mantra, then you don't have to acknowledge the facts on the ground, which is that what you have to do is go talk to the settlers who are like, oh no, we eliminated the possibility of a two-state solution, and they're right, they absolutely did. So I mean, again, like I think that the media has they do more frequently, on the rare instances where they cover settler violence, they do talk about how the military sometimes stands by, or how sometimes they even like support the attacks. But again, like there is detailed, thorough reporting that I have on my Substack, Infinite Jazz, that a lot of it I get from talking to Israeli journalists and talking to activists on the ground, which shows like direct connections between known settler leaders who are orchestrating these attacks with members of the Knesset, with ministers, with the highest levels of the Israeli military. And like, if you just consider the way like Sinwar and various Hamas leaders became like household names to people after October 7th, and people who were really paying attention, you could, they were mapping out the Hamas, Al-Qassam brigades, Hezbollah leadership. They could do the same thing with these settler groups if they wanted to. And they could show how these settler leaders who are terrorists are directly collaborating with the highest levels of the government. And they choose not to do it. And that drives me completely insane, basically.
Thank you so much, Jasper. I feel so bad when we do these episodes. This is the second episode, and we actually would like to say a lot more or hear a lot more from you guys, but we have a couple of people joining us shortly, and I want to close with a final question to Safa, which is about the what you witness and what you see in American media. And I know that your connection to American media is organic because you also lived here for some time. So it's great to hear from you because of that organic connection to the U.S. Mainstream media or any media actually. But if you can comment on the coverage that you've been observing.
I'm recovering from my organic relationship with mainstream media. But I was just to follow up with what Jasper was saying, and I feel like, yes, actually, ironically, Israeli journalists cover what's happening a lot better than American journalists and American media do, even when they come to the region, right? But I think, I was just listening to this thing today from the New York Times, and they were talking about how, they're lamenting how the United States used to be a benevolent superpower and how everybody in the world felt it was a benevolent superpower, and now that's lost, and God knows if it's going to come back. And I'm thinking, it's like, when the fuck was that ever the case? Like, when was this? And so I feel like American journalists, even on the left, center left even, right? They live in this parallel universe of their imaginary relationship with the world, right? Not understanding that the world really has not thought of them in that way. I would argue ever. Right? Even in Europe, they never really thought of them in that way.
What about when we brought democracy to Iraq? They didn't think of us.
Yes. So it's lovely this time of year in Baghdad and Kabul. Like it's ridiculous. And I feel like they are gaslighting themselves. I use this word a lot, but I feel like this is the experience of being exposed to media right now in the West, where they have failed their own standards of journalism, right? Anybody who has actually believed in standards of journalism in the West, of your sourcing and how you cover things, look at how they have absolutely failed in every story on the Middle East ever, right? And so I was reading, Hassanein Heikel wrote a fantastic book on Iran that was published in '82, right after the revolution, right? And in his introduction to his English edition of the book, he is lamenting how the United States and American government officials and the people refuse to properly learn and understand the region, but specifically Iran, right? And this is a book that was published in '82. And I could have read this today and it would have been as accurate today as when he published it. And so it is to me such a repeated lost opportunity for the United States and American journalists to not learn from their mistakes of our lifetime. Like just in the past 20 years, they've refused to do this. And I feel like it's especially like Lebanon and how they're covering it now is atrocious, right? How they're covering Palestine, absolutely atrocious. But even on the Gulf, which are allegedly their allies, they have very little understanding on the ground. They stay in hotels and interview people in lobbies. They only interview people that speak English, right? They have no access to the people on the ground that they could be speaking to get a different narrative. And so all of those are consistent lost opportunities of Western media to do better journalism. It's not that hard, right? And so to me, this war, and I'm sure you feel the same way, Jasper, being on the ground and not being tethered to an editor in an office in New York telling you what you shouldn't do in a story, right? And they're not there on the ground. And I'm like, this is not the reality. I feel that way every time I go to Yemen. Like, they're so disconnected and they want to project realities that have not existed there in a very, very long time, right? And they can't fathom that America is actually the problem, right? In how the Middle East, and I'll confine it to the Middle East and specifically in the Gulf, how they perceive the United States and their policies, and especially the way they are being portrayed in American media, right? There's no reflection. You see nothing. Like, they barely cover what's happening in Lebanon. They barely cover the things. Like, when was the last time you heard about Cuba or what they're doing in Cuba? They're basically starving and killing people through this oil embargo, and nobody knows about it in the United States. Like, there's a deliberate I don't know what to call it, to be honest, because it's not even, there is no censorship on them going to Cuba and covering the story properly. Like, forget the Middle East. I think we think too much of ourselves, and it's like, oh, it's all about the Middle East. But actually, the American media does not do a good job anywhere, not even in the United States itself. That's it.
Thank you, Safa. We have Adel Iskandar, who's going to be joining us in a second. But before he does, do you have any final words, Jasper? And of course, Safa, if you have anything to share as we close. And I know final words sounds ominous, but is there anything you'd like to say? Because we'd like to ask you to come back. So it's not really final at some point.
No, I mean, I think I want to just maybe echo Safa's point that, I mean, it's really just it's criminal levels of negligence that there are not more reporters on the ground in, I mean, you know, for me, the West Bank, but everywhere. And I think, like, you hear so much righteous outrage from journalists that they can't get into Gaza, as you should. I mean, it's, you know, it's ridiculous that they're not letting journalists there, but you can get into the West Bank very easily, actually. And why does that one Jeremy Diamond video, you know, go viral when that is happening every single day in the West Bank? I mean, I went there for a month in October and I got more footage than I knew what to do with. And I didn't have a camera crew. It was just me with my phone. And so, like, if, you know, the New York Times, CNN, NBC, all these places, if they had correspondents there, and most of them have Jerusalem bureaus, but if they had people actually really spending a lot of time in the West Bank, I think you could, like, paint a fuller picture of what's happening there, but they choose not to do it. And so I think that it's just, it's a real shame. And you just, you know, it's just impossible to get the picture of what's happening without on the ground reporting. So it's a real shame.
I agree with that.
Safa, any last words? We're now joined by Adel Iskandar, who will tell us
Adel.
quite a bit
I haven't
about the
seen you in a
media.
million years. How are you?
Good. It's been a while. It's good to see you.
Yes, it's been ages. We're going to say hi and bye.
مش معقول يعني can't you keep us hanging out? I
He's
wanna
been
hang out with
listening.
you.
Don't worry. He's been listening. He's been patiently waiting in the whatever color room, green, blue, pink. Let's call it yellow for today. Safa, anything you'd like to share? Because, I have a lot of questions, especially that we were not able to address the media in the Gulf last time. But if you have anything to share to close, that'll be great. If not, we would love to have you back. And I'm certain this conversation will still be important even in 2 weeks. We're doing the media wars or media/wars. It's going to be called media/wars, I guess, at some point. Series once every 2 weeks.
Amazing. The only thing I would have to say is now that we've talked about mainstream media, I would say that most people, because the reality is not reflected in the coverage anymore, they're becoming irrelevant. They've made themselves irrelevant mostly. And especially in the Gulf, most people now get their news from social media. And so that's an aspect I would love to come back and talk more about like how social media is being used as not just propaganda, but actual news. And so like Substack is not as popular in the Arab world. There isn't as much, but I think social media has replaced a lot of that because a lot of people don't have faith in the government-owned platforms, right?
Well,
and so that's something else that I think is worth looking into, and the impact of that on the discourse itself, right? Where how people are able to safely share and make content that is not controlled by the government.
And on that note, I mean, Jasper says he came back with more footage than he knew what to do with, using only his phone. Then you log on to the BBC website, and there's these fake quotes from Iranians begging for their country to be bombed with nuclear weapons.
I mean, honestly, the laziness of mainstream journalism right now. Like, I think you don't need to be defunded by the British government to make the BBC irrelevant. They've just done it for them. Like, this is how
Exactly their own goal.
Yeah, honestly, it's eating itself. All these media platforms are eating themselves. Everybody's losing their minds about who owns CBS and, buying CNN. It's like, who gives a fuck about them anymore? Nobody really watches them anymore. They go viral because somebody put it on social media. But nobody has watched CNN except if you're unfortunate and turn it on in a hotel room. But other than that, these channels are irrelevant, right? But the problem is nobody has the funding to create the content on these alternative platforms, right? And this is where the other problem is, but that's the bigger question of like the future of journalism in general. And I'll stop there. But do have us on. I would love to talk more about the not mainstream media.
Absolutely, we will do that. And Jasper and Safa, thank you so much for joining us on short notice. We might add.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you soon. Stay safe. Safa, can we disclose your location, or can you disclose it, or should we just not?
Yeah, sure. I'm in Cape Town.
كيفك عادل?
I definitely had a lot to say about the things that they were sharing. It was really great stuff.
So Adel, you're a fixture of this series. So we're going to ask you to share with us your observations on media mechanisms, machinations, and so on. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bassam. Thank you, Mouin. Really happy to be back in this conversation. I want to say that there are so many different angles and perspectives and issues to discuss vis-a-vis the media, largely because this is, when we talk about world wars, it's sometimes very difficult to define what constitutes a world war, but we can speak without much equivocation about how this is literally a media world war in every sense of the word. I mean, the every single media organization around the world, whether small, large, mainstream, independent, alternative, they're all embroiled and engrossed in this war and how it materializes, including influencers and folks who are online. There's so much cacophony and so much to be said about it. I will say, though, that in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on Al Jazeera, because I think Al Jazeera gets a significant amount of the market share as far as discussions about how to cover conflicts, particularly in the Middle East. This is technically their backyard. I want to say really quickly that Al Jazeera, for those who are bilingual, English, Arabic, is a very, very complicated ecosystem, because it exists in two parallel spaces and spheres, two geopolitical, cultural, and linguistic ecosystems that allow them to speak to different audiences in different ways, with different sort of vernacular and different lexicon, different stylistic choices. And that can be very, very complicated and difficult to parse out. But for those who are trying to figure out what Al Jazeera means, or what's going on, and what to take seriously and what to take with a grain of salt, I think it's important to recognize that that Al Jazeera is the headquarters of Al Jazeera is in Doha, Qatar. So smack in the middle of this conflict. The headquarters of Al Jazeera is 45 kilometers from the Al Udeid military base, which is the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East. It is home to Central Command of the U.S. Armed Forces and the primary air operations center. That means that it was absolutely imperative and operationally foundational to the month-long U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. And that is a game changer when we think about political discourse and how decisions are made on the ground. With Iran's retaliatory strikes against the U.S. military assets in the Gulf, that meant that Qatar also became a target, as well as oil and gas hubs and commercial interests. Al Jazeera, specifically as a network, found itself in a very, very difficult dynamic. Now, to understand this dynamic, one has to go back a little bit further and recognize that Al Jazeera was established in 1996. And that's the exact same year that we saw the creation of Fox News Channel in the United States. This is a period where partisan news coverage becomes the mantra of the day and begins to kind of build and billow in such a way that today we can hardly distinguish between partisan press and nonpartisan press. What does it mean to be impartial and objective? All of that is now out of the window 30 years into both Al Jazeera's operations in the Middle East and Fox News in North America or in the US. Now, from its inception, it was always complicated and compelling because the network itself pushed against the grain. The vast majority of news broadcasters in the region are state-owned and operated. Now, Al Jazeera often came off as the network that was firewalled from or at an arm's length away from the Qatari state, or that the Qatari state was too small to matter. But of course, a lot has changed in those 30 years, and Qatar not only does matter, but with this particular conflict, with this particular war on Iran, we see how absolutely outsized Qatar's influence is, because it holds the second largest natural gas reserves in the world. It is a major LNG hub, and it is also a major hub for various other logistics, not to mention air travel, with Qatar Airways being a major commercial airliner for the transport of individuals. So in a book that I co-authored on Al Jazeera in the early 2000s, I described Al Jazeera's journalistic mantra, as contextual objectivity. Now, you can probably sense that there's a tension between those two terms. Context means it's grounded in the realities that are experienced by individuals, which means that it has a lot of subjectivity associated with it. And then objectivity is the attempt to be impartial, or to be, at equidistance or an equal length from different perspectives. But that tension was built into the way in which Al Jazeera does its work. Since then, Al Jazeera has been oscillating between context and the appeal to objectivity over those last 30 years. Now, it is very difficult to know which Al Jazeera you're going to get on any given day. It depends on Qatari foreign policy, the teams that are at the helm in the station, the dynamics on the ground, and so many other circumstances, often opaque and impossible to understand or predict from our standpoint as viewers and analysts. So whether you're looking at Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, or Iran, and particularly vis-a-vis the United States and the US, Al Jazeera is always oscillating. That sort of Janus-faced approach to coverage is not just about language, where you watch Al Jazeera English and you get a different product than what you watch in Al Jazeera Arabic. This has been true from the outset. Even when you're watching the same network, you have no idea which version of Al Jazeera you're going to get. Let me give you an example in relation to the war, the Arab uprisings in 2011. When the uprisings got to Bahrain, up until that point, the Bahraini people's rising up against their government was considered a fairly positive outcome of the revolutionary movements. But in a span of 48 hours, there was a complete shift in tone and approach on Al Jazeera, where it was immediately recognized as a threat to the monarchical sort of governance of the region, and there was an immediate clampdown. And overnight, there was literally not only no coverage of protesters on the ground, but rather an admonishment of that movement. So in some places, the revolutionary movements were considered fantastic and wonderful and were presented in a positive light. In other circumstances, Qatari foreign policy dictated what could and could not be covered on the ground. So that Janus-faced coverage, when you look at specifically the coverage of both the Israeli and American war on Iran, but also the strikes in Iraq and the attacks in Lebanon, the full invasion in Lebanon, and the 2.5-year genocide in Gaza, this is how you can explain and justify the existence of both John Bolton, who is one of the top advocates of this war in Iran or on Iran, that has been he's been advocating for as long as I think he's had a career in politics that the US need to attack Iran. And then simultaneously, you've got Palestinian journalists, many of whom work for Al Jazeera in Gaza and elsewhere, including Shireen Abu Akleh, killed at the hands of Israelis, and kind of commemorating them and memorializing them. And so that tension, that sort of cognitive dissonance, is built into the DNA of Al Jazeera. But I want to say this, that for Al Jazeera, every day is a balancing act, advocating for Palestinian justice or placating Gulf interests, maintaining good relations with the United States, and appealing to audiences in the global north through Al Jazeera English, all while catering to the new kaleidoscopic public opinion in the 22 Arab countries and their diaspora, means that they have now become a jack of all trades and a jack of all editorial trades, to be more specific. It is now attempting to be a medium for everyone. And that's a very dangerous turn of events, because the moment that you become a medium for everyone, you become an advocate for no one. For 30 years, Al Jazeera has been treated like an alternative news medium because it differs from other news channels in the global scene. This war on Iran is the confirmation that Al Jazeera is a network that tries to cater to all, and with the billions of dollars of operational costs, bureaus all over the world, we must begin to accept that Al Jazeera is officially a massive mainstream news conglomerate and needs to be treated as such. So that changes the landscape entirely and the way in which we think about and judge its operations.
Thank you so much, Adel. You have, I mean, that's really important and a really useful background for at least those who haven't followed like what Al Jazeera stands for and what it has been doing. You gave me, I have a couple of images. Do you want me to show them?
Sure.
What would you? I mean, yeah.
So the first is an image of I think it's John Bolton, Al Jazeera sort of advertising the interview that they have with John Bolton, and this got fairly significant airtime. It was repeated over and over again, and of course in the Middle East, and of course Al Jazeera is more specifically, there's actually no ratings game. Al Jazeera does not rely on advertising. So it's not as if having like a really exciting speaker is going to draw in more money. The entire network is bankrolled by the Qatari state. So there's no sort of advertising revenue from having this person up there. But instead, it is to basically placate a particular perspective. And that perspective is one that advocates for imperial war, US imperial war on Iran. And these are the kind of interviews that are either on loop or then end up being sort of spliced and turned into sound bites. And I'm showing John Bolton here just as an exemplar. There are many, many others, including U.S. military officials that appear on Al Jazeera quite regularly, including Israeli spokespersons who advocate for the genocide. So it's really important to know that these individuals are playing the role of the objectivity in the contextual objectivity. So you can, represent sort of the Palestinian, liberation and justice movement, but at the same time try to hold the stick somewhat in the middle by presenting those other perspectives. And so that attempt to be objective actually hinders the very function of the network as a network that's committed to either social justice or committed to sort of anti-imperialist positions. So one cannot consider or treat Al Jazeera as a single entity, but rather as a conglomerate. And with that conglomeration means that the political sort of discourse and the political objective and the ideology is sort of lost in that cacophony. So John Bolton kind of represents one of those perspectives, of which unfortunately there have been many. And for those who've watched the war coverage on Al Jazeera quite closely over the last 30 days, you'll see that that sort of attempt to find balance, if you will. And then the other photo is a photo of some of the journalists who worked for Al Jazeera, either as bureau chiefs and stringers and freelancers and reporters on the ground, all of whom are Palestinian, who have been killed on the front lines of covering Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, but also in the case of Shina Abu Akleh, the Israeli apartheid and constant attempts at disenfranchising Palestinians. And so Al Jazeera is very keen to both memorialize and commemorate them, and of course has had a long campaign of that journalism is not a crime that dates back to various attacks against their reporters and bureaus, keeping in mind that Al Jazeera's offices and bureaus have also been attacked by the US military, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, despite having their headquarters, as I said, within 40 kilometers of Al Udeid. So this has been a very, very complicated waltz between Al Jazeera and the US military and the US government. They often tell us that they share their coordinates with officials, whether it's the U.S. or in the case of Palestine and Gaza, they share their coordinates and the location of their reporters with the Israeli military. But nevertheless, it's sort of an attempt to curb the discourse in such a way that would allow sort of Palestinian voices or Lebanese voices or Iranian voices to be silent. And I would say that this war is one of those circumstances where there has been an open discussion about existential threat for Qatar itself as a polity, as a state, which now has repercussions for how Al Jazeera covers the war. And so we got to hear from Qatari officials describing, threats to their sovereignty and threats to the integrity of the state, and pushing back against Iranian sort of narratives and discourses, which were conflictual with Al Jazeera's coverage.
You wanted us to show a video?
I just want to say really quickly about the targeting of journalists. I think it's important to note that Israel, more specifically, has made it an objective to essentially exterminate journalism, not only as a practice, but as and a profession, but as personnel. So this is unfortunately part of a long, and very bloody tradition of the Israeli crimes against journalism. And so and of course, this wouldn't be the only journalists that are killed in Lebanon. We also have journalists who were killed, I think last week, for Al-Mayadeen, Al-Manar, 2 reporters who were killed by Israeli fire. Targeted assassinations. One has to be clear. This is not accidental. This is targeted assassination. And there was also, as we mentioned, a journalist killed in Gaza. So this is systematic. And of course, Al Jazeera is one that comes out in support of journalistic practice in any and all circumstances. So that's very much to their credit. But the question becomes, to what extent are they prepared to provide platforms and leverage to those who justify and continue to see the extermination of those very personnel that work for their organization? So that sometimes it's very difficult to hold a stick in the middle when those crimes are committed against your own organization and its personnel. So I think the other thing I was going to talk about is what's happening in the Egyptian media.
Yeah, I also wanted to see when you want us to show this video, just in case.
Okay, I'll you know what? In that case,
actually,
let me.
You can hold on 1 second so we can bring in our final guest for this segment, Maya. She's joining us. Hi, Maya. You're muted. It's okay. Well, while we figure this out with Maya, do you want me to play that video? Adel, do you want to address the Egypt situation?
No, let me address it, and then I'll tell you when.
All right, go ahead.
So I think it's important for us to pay attention to what's happening in the Egyptian media, not because it's exciting or that anything really unique or sort of earth-shattering is going on there, but because the Egyptian media plays an outsized role, given the number of stations, the total population in the country. Sometimes it's quite impactful. But I want to say that all media in Egypt has been effectively consolidated under the state's dominion through ownership, sponsorship, and surveillance. And this goes back to 2013. But of course has a longer history that far predates that. State and private media are hardly distinguishable at this point. However, this particular war on Iran has produced an opportunity for the state to showcase its pro-Palestinian credentials in a safe environment. And this is very much unlike the 2.5 years of genocide, where the border with Gaza presented actual sort of tangible risks for the state. So the state was quite heavy-handed in its clamping down against any expressions of solidarity with Palestinians on its airwaves. So this is quite different. This is a much safer environment. Also, a very unique incident involving an official televised Eid sermon in front of Sisi at the Fatah Al-Alim Mosque, which is like the largest mosque built in the new city. Sisi's really big project. Was a very interesting incident which featured an Azhari imam reciting a prayer or a dua from the Book of Fatima, which is extremely rare, that was seen as contextually Shia in nature and perceived as an affront to the Gulf more specifically, given the way in which it was contextualized. So as a result of that, there were very quick retaliations that came from Gulf commentators and some of the online personalities against this imam and against Egypt for allowing this to proceed. Of course, anybody who knows how sermons are managed in Egypt, both Al-Azhar and Friday prayers and Friday sermons are very, very closely managed and monitored. And this, in particular, given the fact that it was televised and in the presence of a Sisi, must have been very, very clearly approved by the state. So the state followed that up with what appears to be a loosening of restrictions on solidaristic expressions from the late night talk show hosts towards Iran. And that was very, very perturbing for a lot of countries in the Gulf. In one particular saga that I want to kind of show a clip from, we can't watch the whole clip, but just a brief clip, features political scientist Rabab al-Mahdi in conversation with prominent Emirati political scientist Abdullah on her podcast, Eh al-Hal, or What is the Solution? So maybe we can watch like a tiny bit of that. I don't think it's subtitled, but...
Okay, I'll play about 30 seconds or so.
Okay.
أبرز نجاح للإمارات لإعادة الاستقرار بدأ من مصر. استثمرت الإمارات في مصر، وقفت إلى جانب مصر في العسر واليسر منذ 2013 إلى اليوم، على مدى 15 سنة تقريبا. فاستثمرت الإمارات ليس اقتصاديا وإنما دبلوماسيا وسياسيا، وارتبطت بمصر واستقرار مصر، حصن الحصين للوطن العربي مصر.
دي دولة مستقرة بقالها آلاف السنين، فيعني قصدي في عمر تاريخ مصر ال 13 سنة الأخيرة دي لا نستطيع أن نزعم أن الإمارات هي السبب في استقرار مصر. مصر مستقرة بموقعها الجغرافي، بتاريخها، بحجمها. مصر تقيلة قوي على أنه تبقى نقول أنه الإمارات هي اللي بتخليها تستقر.
كان بإمكان مصر أن تتحول إلى سوريا. كان هناك أعداء لهذا الاستقرار في مصر. من وقف مع مصر في هذه اللحظة وليس 5000 سنة؟ في خلال ال10 سنوات الأخيرة الإمارات كانت جنباً إلى جنب مع مصر، تؤكد على أن استقرار مصر هو جزء من استقرار الوطن العربي.
خليني أقول لحضرتك المقاربة والمقارنة مع سوريا ليست في محلها، وحضرتك أستاذ علوم سياسية وعارف، ولا التكوين المجتمعي في مصر شبه سوريا، ولا النظام الشمولي الذي كان يحكم سوريا شبه الأنظمة في مصر حتى وإن لم تكن ديمقراطية، ولا التركيبة السكانية ولا البعد الثقافي ولا تاريخ الدولة المركزية. كل ده مختلف تماماً عن سوريا.
لكن أنا أحب أستشهد بسيادة الرئيس.
Yeah.
So she ate him up, and if you can actually translate
Great
for
clip.
Yeah, I mean, in general, for those who may not understand Arabic, basically the Abdullah, who is a retired professor of political science, made the case that if the United Arab Emirates, interchangeably, actually, it's a Freudian slip, if the UAE had not stepped in 2013 to invest in Egypt, that it would have had disastrous outcomes, that the prospects from then on would have led to Egypt becoming embroiled in civil strife and poverty, similar to what happened in both Syria and Iraq. Rabab al-Mahdi pushed back, claiming that Egyptian particularities make it incomparable to these countries, denying that the outsized sort of magnitude or exaggerated impact of Emirati assistance on the stability of the country. And the conversation goes on. In fact, it goes even further, where she calls him out or calls out the Emiratis on their support for Israel and the Abraham Accords and what that means in light of the genocide in Gaza. To which he responded with fairly sort of standard kind of pragmatic political arguments, but what ended up happening was the show itself was one thing. It's the aftermath. The firestorm that it produced was quite significant. Both interlocutors, just to keep in mind, both interlocutors were considered rude or problematic in the two ecosystems within which they exist. So in the Emirati media, there was sort of retaliation against Rabab al-Mahdi, claiming that she and other Egyptians who support her argument are ungrateful, and that Emiratis should not have invested in Egypt, et cetera, and calling for Egyptians to take back those kind of accusations, and that the Emirates is the only reason why the Middle East is successful or is financially viable. And then the opposite in the Egyptian media, where the Egyptian media also picked that up.
Adel, we'd love to ask you to stay for a second so we can bring Maya in for just a few minutes to address the Lebanon situation. Adel, do you want to stay with us and continue later?
I can just say one last sentence and then
Okay.
and just let
Go ahead.
Maya step in, because I think Lebanon is much more important right now.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that with that particular example,
is it a sentence or is it a Adel sentence?
لا مش عادل sentence. So I just want to say that this example is a clearly sort of newfound discursive autonomy on the part of the Egyptian media, much of which clearly approved and sanctioned by the state, allowing for the move away from that delicate balance to push back in ways that it didn't before. And I think it has a lot to do with the waning influence of the Gulf financially and politically in the region writ large, and might have very interesting repercussions for how Egypt situates itself, particularly in relation to Palestine. Bas.
Very interesting, Adel. Thank you.
Thank you. Yalla, good luck.
Hello, Maya.
Hang in there, Maya.
You're muted.
Thank you, Adel, and we will bring you back shortly. Sorry, we cut to Maya quickly. Maya, I don't know what to say. You and I and others have have been talking about the same thing this morning after the monstrous, murderous rampage on Beirut. We'll leave you with any commentary you'd like to address on what happened in Lebanon today.
I mean, I don't really have commentary, and as I just texted you, I have to go. I have to leave to pick up someone from school. But
let me do this again so that we don't
being
include this in the
live.
show. Let me just ask you. I'll say welcome, Maya. I know you're on a very short deadline. The floor is yours for whatever you'd like to share, and then you can share whatever you want because you already appeared. It's nice to say something even if it's just 1 minute. Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Hi, Maya. I know that you are on a short schedule, and we would like to give you the floor for whatever you'd like to share on this horrible day.
Well, today is absolutely horrible. I wish we could say it's unexpected, but unfortunately, I think it was very clear that Israel had no intention of honoring any kind of ceasefire when it comes to Lebanon. This is unsurprising because this has been its modus operandi, both in Lebanon and in Palestine. And for two reasons. First of all, that ceasefires always mean you cease, I continue firing. But also, if we look at recent history, the hours before a ceasefire or while a ceasefire is actually getting hammered out are the most violent. Whether that is the 2006 war, when Israel dropped about 1 million cluster munitions, right before the ceasefire took effect, hundreds of thousands of them in South Lebanon. Whether it is today or whether it's the fact that since 2024, November 2024 and March 2nd, 2025, there was officially a ceasefire in place, and yet Israel had committed at least 10,000 to 15,000, according to some counts, ceasefire violations, including the murder of almost 400 people. So I wish I could say, I think what is surprising is the level of barbarism, the scale of barbarism. In about 10 minutes, around more than 100 targets were hit. These bombings hit central Beirut, Beirut suburbs, and also the cities of Saida, Tire, in the Bekaa, and also further south. At least 254 people have been killed. This number will go up because there are still people under the rubble. Over 1,300 wounded. That is literally, the scale of killing within a 10-minute like saturation bombing. Well, maybe like an hour of bombing. So, including the latest one is a bringing down an entire building in an area of Beirut called Talt al-Khayyat. So I really wish, I think we all wish that we lived in a world where these barbarisms surprise us, but sadly that's not the world we live in. So while it is absolutely infuriating and all we can do is watch the scale of this destruction, and I think, many analysts, including myself, have always, were saying that the war in Lebanon will last longer than any of the front in Iran. And that is for two reasons. First of all, because it preceded it, and it preceded many wars. I think there's been a state of permanent war, actually, not only between the Israeli state and Palestinians, but also with Lebanon and with Lebanese people, particularly in the south of Lebanon, from the south of Lebanon. And I do think that there are media tropes that have been deployed, used, normalized, circulated, that really sort of at this point serve almost like an alibi for these kinds of this kind of barbarism and destruction. I think at a certain point there is a license given, not only for Israel to commit genocide in Gaza, but also to commit ethnic cleansing in Lebanon and the massive bombardment of like cities, towns, villages, detonation of villages. And some of those media tropes, they're very similar to the tropes that we've been inundated with for the last 3 years, but some of them have a local twist. So the first one I would say is the very term ceasefire. Ceasefire has a particular definition, but when it comes to Israel, it has a totally different definition, which is that you cease and I continue to fire. So anytime, it's as if Israeli bombardment during ceasefires don't break ceasefires, but any attack on any Israeli asset does break a ceasefire. And this is really, I think, about, whose lives are considered to be, or whose brutalization is just normalized to the extent that it's not even news, and whose brutalization not only inaugurates news, but inaugurates time in a way, and how we tell time. So ceasefire is one of those tropes. Another trope would be, and these are tropes that I, watch for in the media. Another is incursion. What is an incursion? It's an Israeli invasion, or it's an invasion when it's done by Israel. It becomes an incursion. Or I think I've also seen headlines that say, extend their control in South Lebanon, extend their footprint in South Lebanon. What is actually being discussed is invasion and occupation. But somehow the impunity of Israel requires a whole new dictionary, and requires the whole new redefinition of words that simply hold a different meaning when it comes to Israeli violence. So incursion, ceasefire, Hizb Allah stronghold is another one. I'm sure you've both seen this trope in the media, circulating in the media. What this means is this is either a Shia majority area in Lebanon, neighborhood, city, town, village, and even, I think we're getting down to the point of like buildings, marking particular buildings. But this is really, what that means is very much marks a kind of sectarian demographic, and is an adoption of a sectarian language and sectarian redlining that functions to make particular populations automatically suspect, and thus their killing is less of a crime. Or, if it's and I mean crime, I think none of us believe that that there will be no accountability for actual crimes. So I don't mean it in that sense. I mean it in the sense of in like the popular psyche, the public psyche in the West. Another trope that we all know very well is human shields. I don't even think
Also
that
known
we
as
need
civilians.
also known as civilians, also known as people, also known as doctors, journalists, ambulance drivers, also known as teta, jiddo, sisters, brothers, friends, lovers, children. All of these are human shields. And, I think that part of why this is insidious is it's also like after the fact. Who is a human shield? The person who was killed by Israel, by an Israeli bomb, that becomes a human shield. So they're also sort of retroactive, a lot of these tropes. and how they fit onto people. A big one is also buffer zone. Buffer zone. What is a buffer zone? It is an Israeli occupied territory that's been turned into a DMZ. Demilitarized zone, what that means is the absolute detonation, decimation, and herbicide of entire areas and ethnic cleansing where people are not allowed to go back. And that is, quote unquote, a buffer zone. If you notice, of course, buffer zones are never on Israeli sides of borders. They're only in Gaza. They're only in Lebanon. You know, they may end up in other geographies also, in
Syria?
Palestine, Syria, and also in Palestine. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think there's a part of what we are dealing with is a circulation of tropes regionally that are just about who Israel targets. And ultimately, whatever is in the, I mean, what I mean is this, in some ways, these are not even tropes that circulate about Lebanese and Palestinians. It's really tropes that circulate around Israel and Israelis, right? What is a buffer zone? It's a DMZ, it's an occupied DMZ. And about giving license to particular ways of circulating knowledge actually about Israel and the Israeli state and the Israeli society. You know, another one which is we've become very tragically used to is combatant age. What this means is any boy over the age of 14 who suddenly ceases to be a civilian. It is the whole scale rendering of boys and men into, always already a possible combatant, and therefore, again, not a civilian, and it is the designation that you put on people after you kill them. From what I can see, this is actually the designation comes after. Terrorist infrastructure. Civilian infrastructure, that's what that means.
Isn't that
Roads,
a hospital?
civilian infrastructure, anything that it's hospitals, first aid centers, roads, bridges, highways, anything that civilians actually will use and need. Because if the goal of this quote unquote incursion to create a buffer zone is basically to depopulate an area, and this is what they have essentially done in Gaza, then anyone found in that territory, anything that might sustain life in that territory will be razed to the ground. And that's what civilian infrastructure means at that level. I want to remind everybody that 1.2 million people in Lebanon are displaced. And these are not just Lebanese people. Lebanon is a very diverse society, very diverse and unequal societies. This includes Lebanese people, Palestinians, Syrians, migrant laborers. Anyone who lives in Lebanon, a subsection of them are currently displaced. And as they are displaced, the places where they live are being destroyed to make it much more difficult for them to return. On the local level, when you look at local news, you have to remember that each of these channels is owned by private interests, often most often, with notable exception, very closely aligned to political movements and leaders who are either in power or would like to be in power. Yeah, I don't know what else you guys want to talk about.
Unfortunately, you've summed it up very well.
Yeah, we will see. We will see, right? I mean, apparently the Israeli state announced that the next 48 hours they're just going to do all this bombing, without any warnings or anything, announcements of evacuations or anything. So I think we will expect to see this continue, if not intensify. But I also want to note here, like, because today I think a lot of us are, have part of why this happened is because international media has not been talking about Lebanon. And I don't just mean in relation to the escalation that began on March 2nd. It is because international media has not been covering Lebanon that March 2nd was able to be framed as the opening, as the beginning of something, because the ceasefire had been framed as Israel can do what it wants when it wants.
Yep.
So that's the first thing. But the second thing to note here today, as we, are talking about this massive bombardment in Beirut, is to remember that Beirut is the capital city. So we're all, and we all have, most people from Lebanon and from the region have some connection to Beirut. But also that each village in the south that is being bombed, detonated, destroyed, completely is also a red line. Like if there are red lines, it's every house, every home, every apartment. It's not only when Israel brings down a Beirut in Talt al Khayyat or in Barbour, or in Ain Mraisi, if they hit Ain Mraisi in Ras Beirut. Every single destruction of somebody's home, apartment, every person dug out of the rubble, every person killed in an airstrike or tank fire or from ships and wherever else they're bombing from. These are all red lines. So we are focusing, today I think the focus is Beirut, but we need to keep that level of focus for the entire geography of Lebanon and Palestine.
Thank you, Maya, for
Thank you.
this really, I don't know, sad and I don't know what to say. The terminology that we all are used to see in the media that cover and camouflage the brutality that's been dealt to people in the region. I just sometimes wonder if the situations were flipped, the manner in which this will be addressed. There's also the issue because you mentioned
Of course, it
something
would
about
be
the
obviously
ceasefire.
the
Sorry.
coverage would be totally different, obviously.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about the ceasefire and how because Lebanon wasn't being covered, it's also that because Lebanon wasn't being covered, people have the impression that Hezbollah broke the ceasefire, and this is all over social media, especially from certain sides which are obvious, the sides that support the war on Iran and on Lebanon and the genocide in Gaza. There's complete neglect, as we discussed last week, of the hundreds, if not thousands of times that the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel that was forged in 2024 has been violated by Israel on
There
almost
was
a
no
daily basis.
ceasefire. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I think even using the words, right? Like even continuing, even using those words like buffer zone, ceasefire, combatant age, Hezbollah stronghold. We have to also recognize them, I think, as forms of soft propaganda, like basically shaping language into a cover for particular narratives about war, expansion, occupation, killing. Language uses us as we use it. So we have to be incredibly watchful for these terms because not only do the terms themselves not make sense, logically, but they actually do make sense if they're actually they're deployed to do something, right? If
Yeah.
they're deployed with an action to kind of change the discursive landscape. And I think that's the danger of this.
but we actually have a couple more people joining us, and we will be addressing the broader picture as well again. And we would love to have you again with us, Maya. Thank you for staying on, even though you're on a tight schedule. These episodes have actually been deployed based on developments, and thank you to you and everyone for joining us on such short notice.
Yes, thank you
Hopefully
very
we'll speak
much.
again.
It was very powerful.
Thanks, Mouin and Bassam, for keeping us on top of things. And I'm here whenever, we're in this together, huh? So here we are.
Absolutely. Take care, Habibti. Salam.
Yalla. Ma'as-salama.
Yeah, so Mouin, this is it for this moment. We have a couple more conversations coming up, and I know that we'll be doing this again in a couple of weeks.
Yes, unfortunately, there will still be a next time for media wars because the wars continue in one way or another throughout the region.
Absolutely. Unfortunately.
We're extremely pleased to be joined by Dr. Abdullah Baabood, the Omani academic and political analyst. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd first like to ask you, a ceasefire agreement has just been concluded. I presume people throughout the Gulf are now breathing an enormous sigh of relief, given the apocalyptic statements that were being made the previous 24 hours. Can you give us a sense of the response to these developments in Oman and perhaps in the Gulf more generally?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and for hosting me this panel, for you, Mouin, for Bassam, and I'm honored to be with you. To be very honest with you, we were very apprehensive about what was coming. We have seen what had happened over the last few weeks, as it were, since this war has started. We've seen the devastation that has happened not only to our neighboring country, Iran, but also to Lebanon and particularly to our Gulf states. We have, Iran has responded in attacking some facilities, civilian infrastructure in the Gulf states. And for the first time, this region that has always been considered as a stable and secure region, we've seen, that people are really worried about how far this is going to go and how far the escalation is going to go higher. And with the threat that President Trump had been, echoing, as it were, taking Iran into Stone Age and destroying their civilization. People in this region were worried that Iran would also respond by attacking further Gulf states, civilian infrastructure and critical infrastructure. And as you know, this region doesn't have enough water, so we depend heavily on desalination plants, and anything that threatens that, it basically threatens life. The other thing what happens is that, like many countries, we depend on energy, and any attacks on our energy resources, whether it is meant for export or petrochemicals or refineries, etc., will have devastating effect on the civilian people, let alone, the casualties and the destruction that could happen. And we've seen some of it already happening in some of our neighboring countries. The other thing that also was scary was, what is this going to do to the reputation of the region, and also to its economic future, that we've been trying to ensure that this region stays safe, stays stable, attract foreign investment and know-how and technology, and try and develop trading arrangements with the global countries. All of this is going to be challenged by the war, and it's already challenged. But if it had escalated further, it would have created even further challenge. As you know, the Gulf states have been working very hard to diversify their economy away from oil and gas, and they have embarked on a number of strategic visions to see them beyond oil. All of this is already affected, and it was going to become even more affected had this ceasefire not taken place. So people, kind of sighing a sigh of relief that the ceasefire has been announced, and it's like one of the best. It is the best news that we've ever heard in the last few decades, as it were.
I'd like to ask you also specifically about Oman, from where you're speaking with us. Oman was, of course, the key mediator seeking to prevent this war by negotiating an agreement between the United States and Iran. And its foreign minister has basically repeatedly stated this is a war that could and should have been avoided. You, in your social media posts, have often expressed the view that this is a war that Oman and the other Gulf states have been involuntarily dragged into by decisions made beyond their control. What is this? What implications, if any, will this have for the future strategic positioning of Oman and the other Gulf states?
Well, Oman, as a member of the Gulf States Cooperation Council, works closely in coordinating its strategies and policies with its member states within the GCC. And I think that goes for almost all the other GCC countries, where there are meetings between foreign ministers and different officials to coordinate policies in a number of issues, whether it is foreign policy, security, or trade and so on. And there is, of course, a common line that all these countries try and keep to. And in this sense, they all feel that they have been a victim of geography, where this war has been decided not in their best interest, and their interest wasn't taken into consideration when the United States decided, perhaps with the instigation from Netanyahu, to embark on this war on Iran. They felt that the United States did not take into consideration that Iran had already threatened that it will attack U.S. installations within the Gulf states. And as we know, there are a number of them across the Gulf states, where the Gulf play host to a number of U.S. Bases, military bases, but also there are a lot of other arrangements, security arrangements and collaboration between U.S. and the Gulf states. So these immediately, these arrangements or these points became a target for Iran. So Oman had always had, like also other Gulf states, while they do have a common policy, there is also each country try and develop its own independent policy, always trying to coordinate, but doesn't always work well, as we know. So each country has its own foreign policy, and there is, of course, coordination, but not necessarily a common foreign policy. For Oman, Iran is a very important country. It's a neighboring country with large population, and there is, of course, a long history between Oman and Iran. Moving from earlier period where there was, antagonism between them, and there was also an invasion of Iran to Omani territories. But even in the recent history, where Iran has helped Oman against, revolutions, but most important, Oman and Iran share the Strait of Hormuz. And for Oman, this is like a very strategic and important choke point, not only for the Gulf, but for the whole world. It actually doesn't, although it affects Oman to a certain extent, but it doesn't affect Oman to a large extent as it does affect other Gulf states. Because as you know, many people know that most of the Omani ports, if not all, are outside the Strait of Hormuz. But the Strait of Hormuz actually serves all the other neighboring countries, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, etc. So Oman wanted to make sure that this strait and this choke point stays open for international trade, benefiting the regional neighbors, but also benefiting the international community, because as we know, a large percentage of oil and gas passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and where the world community depends on this energy for its security, energy security, etc. So Oman wanted to play that role to ensure that its relationship with Iran would keep that Strait of Hormuz open at all times. Unfortunately, it didn't work during this crisis, not because of that, that there's a fault in the relationship, but because someone else decided to launch a war against a neighboring country, and without taking into consideration regional interests or also global interests. So yes, Oman does have, to a very large extent, an independent foreign policy that coordinates with the Gulf states, but sometimes they follow their own policy where they think it is in the best interest of their sovereignty and their security and the stability of the region. It doesn't necessarily always fit in within the Gulf states, but I think the Gulf states realized as time goes by that Oman's foreign policy has been extremely helpful in securing and helping to secure the region.
Final question I'd like to ask you is, now, of course, discussions are centering around some kind of toll arrangements through the Strait of Hormuz, in which Iran and Oman would be partners. I don't know whether Oman has been involved in these discussions, but more broadly, how is the Omani media and the Gulf media responding to this crisis and looking at the future? Is it in line with what you have been telling us, or have they been expressing different views?
I think there are different views, and that is expected. As I said, there are 6 different GCC states with 6 different foreign policies. And there are, of course, areas of coordination between them if and when it was possible. Some of these countries, like Oman in particular, and Qatar, have tried to play a neutral role, using mediation and hedging, strategic hedging as much as possible. While other countries were a bit quiet. There is historical antagonism between Iran and Bahrain that goes back into the history of the creation of the state of Bahrain. and the Kingdom of Bahrain. There has been also issues between Emirates and United Arab Emirates and Iran over the islands. But overall, there were, there was de-escalation happening in this relationship. There was rapprochement. We've seen even in 2023.
This is in the years before the war you're talking about.
Yes, and before the war, we've seen a rapprochement between Saudi and Iran, and I think the region, also the Iranian fervor for revolution has changed to a large extent. Not exporting revolution and not interfering in domestic politics. So. Many people in the region actually appreciate this change and welcome it, because we know that for sure, if we want to live in peace and prosperity and security within this region, we have to deal with Iran as a neighboring country and accept it as it is and find the practical ways of dealing with it. But there are others who don't like that, and they still, hold certain views about Iran and about its, involvement in some of the Arab politics, controlling, some Arab capitals, trying to export the revolution, etc. So you see divergence of interest and also of of opinions within the Gulf states. But I think the majority want to see peace, want to see security, want to see Iran as part of playing a very important role. At least the people who understand this. Of course, there are different narratives to this, but in general, people welcomed. People were worried about the war. Although some were, calling for the U.S. to go further, but in general, some were worried about the extent of the war and the escalation, and they were worried about their countries being attacked. And of course, I believe what Iran has done was the wrong thing to attack the neighboring state. In a way, it's a strategic mistake to push these countries further into the other side, when and not only the governments but also the people, no one would accept their countries to be attacked and their sovereignty to be infringed that way. But in general, there is a lot of understanding to what Iran had gone through, and the fact that Iran was happy to de-escalate, happy to talk about its nuclear stockpiling and enrichment program and its missiles. As we've heard from the Omani foreign minister, they were very close to having a negotiated settlement to all these issues, and many people feel that Iran wasn't, there was no need to attack it in the way that it was attacked, and they feel that Israel was behind this in a very large way. So you have this divergent of narratives, of views, etc. But I think there was a lot of sympathy for Iran because they see the war as, many people see it as illegal, despite whatever they think about Iran and its regime, as it were. And this is, it changed a little bit because of the Iranian attacks on the Gulf states. But in large, almost everyone wanted de-escalation because they realize and they comprehend what the cost and the likely cost would be to the Gulf states, because escalation can only lead to further destruction and further conflicts, and the Gulf states are a vulnerable state, despite the fact they've been able to prevent some of these attacks. But as I said, their critical infrastructure is quite vulnerable, and Iran could do a lot of damage and harm to our economies, our critical infrastructure. So I think many people were trying to avoid this. So when the news broke out that there is a ceasefire, I think there was a lot of, at least amongst the many people and the people who are rational about, the security of the Gulf, I think there are many people who are happy about this. And I believe that in the future, that Iran will have to be part of the security arrangement in the Gulf and have to play part in the Gulf. It cannot be excluded. It's a very important country. It also feels threatened, like we do feel threatened by Iran. Therefore, I think the best way is to include it in some kind of a regional mechanism, a regional arrangement where Iran and the Arab Gulf states can talk to each other and can de-escalate and can have some kind of a dialogue to prevent any conflict in the future.
Ustaz Abdullah, I have a question that is a bit sensitive, but it's actually the main question. Essentially, was it even conceivable that Iran wouldn't strike American bases in Gulf countries that have hosted American bases that actually have affected Iran's security when Iran was being bombed, quote unquote, to the Stone Age or whatever it is that has been discussed? Like, is there another scenario that leaders in the Gulf countries, in the various Gulf countries, imagined, or did they anticipate that? Because in the view of so many observers, it was a certainty, because otherwise what had ended up now changing the course of the war, whether it's closing the Strait of Hormuz or striking American bases, even infrastructure in return, in retaliation to America and Israel striking infrastructure in Iran, those are the things that affected and changed the course of the war. So is it conceivable that Iran wouldn't strike the Gulf countries with American bases in them? I mean, was this part of any calculation, or was it understood that it's going to happen, but we have to say this publicly, because otherwise, first of all, yes, it is violating their country's sovereignty and causing damage and human costs and killing and so on. So they have to say this. Everyone understands that they have to say this. But was it conceivable in the minds of rulers that Iran would just die and be like, okay, everything's fine, we're not going to strike these bases? Was this part of any calculation of anyone?
I think that's a really important question as well, and a critical one. In a sense, it is, it goes deep into what has been our calculations here in the Gulf, and was it conceivable? Well, we don't have to dig deep to find out if it's conceivable or not. First of all, Iran had always threatened that if it was attacked by the US, it was going to attack US bases in the Gulf. It was always against US bases and the presence of US bases in the Gulf. So in a way, that was always been on the card, and they've threatened, that they would do that. And the Strait of Hormuz, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz was one of the cards that also they have alluded to in the past. That if they were attacked, they would go all the way, and they will wreak havoc in the region. Now, when Iran is attacked in the way that it was attacked, and the way that this war aims were not only very complex and not clear, but it included, the change of the regime and to dismantle all their power, that became an existential threat for Iran. And for Iran to just sit there as a lame duck, expecting, to be attacked, and accepting attacks from US and Israel, I think it is inconceivable that they would not respond by attacking US interests in the region, and also accelerating or escalating the conflict to help to de-escalate. So I think they've used some of the cards they had already mentioned they would do. They even, talked about, getting their allies to come into the war with them, and they've employed, or they have managed to get Hezbollah in Lebanon to support them. They even had Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, although that has been limited. But they had a number of cards, and obviously, when you are under attack and this is an existential threat to you, one can expect they would go to that level. And if that wasn't taken into consideration by the Gulf states, or also by their security allies, the United States, then I think there is something wrong in their calculation, in our calculation. This is not to justify what Iran has done. As you said, they have attacked the regional countries, they infringed and violated our sovereignty. But this was expected, and not only that, it was announced before the war that they will go as far as possible to protect their regimes and their state, and so on. So I think we have been made a victim here, and to save Netanyahu and his government in Israel. The Gulf states were, had to pay the price for that, and unfortunately, the presidency in the U.S. fall into this trap. But we are the ones who paid the high price, and I hope that this is something that will be able to come out of it, in a sense that any regional security arrangement after the war will have to take into consideration Iran as an important regional country. As we fear them, they fear us. And as their security is also important for our security. And we need to get them and the United States to be able to talk to each other and to have a good working relationship, because this antagonism between the United States and Iran, it doesn't help us. We are always going to be an ally of the United States. This is an important region. The United States is an important ally, and it's the world's most important powerful country. And we are, in general, small states. We can't protect ourselves, so we have to have, like many countries around the world, we have to have this alliance with the United States. But at the same time, we can't have this alliance when the United States is also at odds with Iran. So it's in our interest to ensure that we bring in Iran into the fold, and bring the United States to accept Iran as a regional country and to play a more positive role in the security and the stability of the region, and also of the global economy, rather than continue with this path, because we know what this path is going to take us, and we know how dangerous it can be, not only for Iran but also for our own interests in the Gulf and the regional interests that are suffering quite a lot because of this, but also global interests, and also U.S. reputation and U.S. standing, because that many people started to ask, why did the U.S. do this when they know that Iran is going to retaliate against us? Why did the U.S. risk our interest for the interest of Netanyahu? So these are big questions that will have to be we'll have to debate, and we will have to come up with some answers for them in the future. But as I said earlier, we can't continue to live in the world that we live in, because we know what that is going to take us. Iran being excluded from any regional arrangement is not helpful to us. We have to bring Iran in, we have to bring Iraq in, we have to bring the neighboring countries, even Turkey, into a security arrangement that ensures the stability and security of the whole region, and bring in other international partners like the United States, and obviously any Western powers like NATO and others, because even China, Russia, if they were willing to take some of the burden of the security in the region, I think they will be welcomed by the United States. And the United States leadership had called for China to take some of the security burden in the region, because this region is important to the global economy and to the stability of oil market and to global connectivity, because it lies between the East and West, as it were. It's important for many people, and therefore its security and stability is important for all. So I think we need a paradigm shift in the way that we think in the future about regional security, and we shouldn't let one person in Tel Aviv decides the future of the region to protect his his reputation and his standing within his own government. I think we should be working together as a collectivity to stop that happening in the future.
Thank you so
Dr.
much,
Abdullah.
Abdullah, for addressing this. I'd leave the last word for Mouin, but thank you for your question. And no one envies conscientious people in the Gulf today because of the situation that they're in. Mouin, last words for you.
No, just I think that laid out all the dilemmas and the challenges very clearly. So, Dr. Abdullah Baabood, just to thank you once again for making the time to speak with us for Media Wars. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Shukran.
Thank you. Good to see you. Appreciate it. Thank you. شكرا
Thank you.
جزيلا.
شكرا.
تسلموا.
أهلين.
ليلتكم سعيدة. شكرا.
أنت بالأكثر. شكرا.